My name is Luna Blackwood, and despite building a successful life, I was never good enough for my family. What happened that night changed everything. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe. If you've ever had to prove your worth to people who never saw it. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in my corner office on the 32nd floor of the Meridian Tower in Cambridge, Massachusetts, watching the Charles River wind its way through the city below. Here I was, Senior Vice President of Strategic Operations at Silver Rock Capital, one of the most prestigious investment firms on the East Coast. And yet, I could still hear my father's voice echoing in my mind from 20 years ago. Luna, you'll never amount to anything. You're not Matthews material, Richard Matthews. Even his name carried weight in our circles. Real estate mogul, philanthropist, the kind of man who could make or break careers with a single phone call. To the outside world, he was the perfect patriarch of a successful family. To me, he was the man who made me feel like I was constantly walking on thin ice, desperately trying to prove I belonged. I was 32 now, and I'd spent the better part of the last decade climbing the corporate ladder with a determination that bordered on obsession. Every promotion, every successful deal, every accolade was a silent middle finger to the man who told me I'd never be good enough. But no matter how high I climbed, no matter how much money I made, no matter how many times my name appeared in Financial Times or Forbes, it was never enough for him. The Matthews family lived in a world of old money and older expectations. My father had built his empire on the foundation laid by his father and grandfather before him. Matthews and Associates wasn't just a real estate company. It was a dynasty. And in that dynasty, there was a very clear hierarchy. My older brother, James, the golden child who could do no wrong, followed by my younger sister, Sophia, the beautiful socialite who married well and produced the requisite grandchildren. And then there was me. I'd always been different. Where James was charismatic and naturally gifted at schmoozing clients, I was analytical and detail-oriented. Where Sophia was content to play the role of the perfect daughter, attending charity galas and hosting dinner parties, I wanted to build something of my own. I wanted to prove that intelligence and hard work could matter more than birthright and connections. The problem was, every time I tried to prove myself, I was met with dismissal or outright hostility. When I graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School, my father's response was, "About time you did something right." When I landed my first job at a top-tier consulting firm, he said, "We'll see how long it lasts." When I was promoted to Senior Vice President at Silver Rock Capital, the youngest person in the company's history to hold that position, he simply nodded and changed the subject. But I kept trying, kept pushing, kept believing that maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time he would see me for who I had become rather than who he thought. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late October. Sophia's voice was bright and artificially cheerful, the way it always was when she was trying to manipulate someone into doing something they didn't want to do. "Luna, darling, I have the most wonderful news. Daddy's turning 65 next month, and we're throwing him the most amazing party. The whole family will be there, plus all his business associates, political friends, everyone who matters. It's going to be at the estate, of course, black tie affair. You simply must come." I could hear the unspoken expectation in her voice. This wasn't really an invitation, it was a summons. In the Matthews family, you didn't skip important events. You showed up, you smiled, you played your part, and you pretended everything was perfect. "Of course I'll be there," I said, already mentally rearranging my schedule. "What can I bring?" "What does he need?" Sophia laughed, that tinkling sound that had always grated on my nerves. "Oh, you don't need to worry about bringing anything, sweetie. James and I have already taken care of everything. We know how busy you are with your little job, my little job," as if managing a portfolio worth over $2 billion was comparable to planning charity luncheons and shopping for designer handbags. But I bit my tongue as I always did. "Well, if you change your mind and need anything, just let me know." After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out at the city below. A part of me wanted to skip the party entirely to send a polite excuse and spend the weekend working or reading or doing Anything other than subjecting myself to another evening of subtle insults and passive-aggressive comments. But another part of me, the part that had been trying to win my father's approval for 3 decades, whispered that maybe this was my chance. Maybe this time I could do something that would finally make him proud. The idea came to me 3 days later during a client meeting with the CEO of a luxury automotive dealership. We were discussing investment opportunities in the high-end car market when he mentioned that he had just acquired a limited edition 2024 Mercedes-AMG S65 Final Edition. There were only 65 units produced worldwide, he explained, and each one was a masterpiece of German engineering and craftsmanship. "It's a shame," he said, shaking his head. "I already have 3 S-Class vehicles, and my wife is threatening to divorce me if I bring home another car. But this one is special. Matte black exterior, hand-stitched leather interior, every possible luxury feature. It's not just a car, it's a work of art." As he spoke, I felt something click into place in my mind. My father had always been particular about his cars. He drove a series of high-end vehicles over the years, but his favorite had always been his Mercedes S-Class. He'd owned 7 different models over the past 2 decades, each one immaculately maintained and perfectly detailed. It was one of the few things that genuinely brought him joy. A limited edition S65 Final Edition, numbered 65 out of 65 for his 65th birthday. The symbolism was perfect, the rarity was undeniable, and the price tag, well, the price tag was significant enough to make a statement. How much would someone have to pay to convince you to part with it? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. His eyes lit up with the unmistakable gleam of a businessman who smelled a profitable deal. "Well, I paid $450,000 for it, but given its rarity and condition, I'd say $750,000 would be fair. $750,000. It was more than most people made in a decade, more than I'd had ever spent on anything other than my condo. But I had been living modestly for years, saving and investing most of my substantial salary. I could afford it, barely, but I could afford it. More importantly, it would be impossible to dismiss or diminish. This wasn't just an expensive gift, it was a statement. It was proof that I had not only succeeded, but succeeded spectacularly. It was the kind of gesture that demanded acknowledgement, that forced recognition. "I'll take it," I said. The paperwork took 2 weeks to complete. Custom insurance, registration transfers, transportation arrangements, every detail had to be perfect. I arranged for the car to be delivered to the estate the morning of the party, wrapped in a custom black silk cover with a silver ribbon. I even had a small placard made engraved with "Happy 65th birthday, Dad, from your daughter Luna." As the day of the party approached, I found myself feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement. For once, I wasn't dreading a family gathering. For once, I felt like I had something that would silence the critics and the doubters. For once, I felt like I might finally get the recognition I had been seeking for so long. I should have known better. The Matthews estate in Dover was exactly as I remembered it, imposing, immaculate, and intimidating. The colonial-style mansion sat on 12 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, complete with a circular drive lined with ancient oak trees that had been there longer than our family had owned the property. As my driver pulled up to the front entrance, I could see that Sophia hadn't been exaggerating about the guest list. The driveway was filled with luxury vehicles, and I could hear the sound of conversation and laughter drifting from the back terrace. Had chosen my outfit carefully. A midnight blue silk dress by Oscar de la Renta, understated but elegant, with my grandmother's pearl necklace and matching earrings. I wanted to look successful but not flashy, confident but not threatening. In the Matthews family, there was a fine line between making an impression and making enemies. James greeted me at the door, looking every inch the successful businessman in his custom-tailored tuxedo. At 35, he had inherited our father's charisma and natural leadership abilities, along with his tendency toward casual cruelty. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," he said, embracing me in a hug that was just tight enough to be uncomfortable. "I was starting to think you'd gotten too important for family gatherings." "Wouldn't miss it?" I replied, keeping my voice light. Where is the birthday boy? Out back, holding court as usual. Half the Massachusetts State Senate is here, plus the mayor, the police commissioner, and about 50 business leaders. You know how Dad loves an audience. I followed James through the house, noting the familiar details that had remained unchanged since my childhood. The hand-painted wallpaper in the foyer, the crystal chandelier that had belonged to my great-grandmother, the oil paintings of stern-faced Matthew's ancestors who seemed to judge everyone who passed beneath their gaze. The back terrace had been transformed into an elegant party space, with round tables covered in white linen, elaborate floral centerpieces, and a small orchestra playing classical music in the corner. I estimated there were about 100 guests, all dressed in their finest evening wear, all part of the exclusive world that my family inhabited. And there in the center of it all was Richard Matthews Dot at 65. He was still an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair that he wore slicked back and piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. He was surrounded by a circle of admirers, telling some story that had them all laughing and nodding appreciatively. This was his element, being the center of attention, wielding his influence, reminding everyone of his importance. He saw me approaching and his expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the warm smile cooling to something more neutral. Luna, he said, extending his hand as if I were a business acquaintance rather than his daughter. Good of you to make it. Happy birthday, Dad, I said, accepting the handshake and leaning in for a brief, awkward hug. You look great. Well, 65 years of good living will do that for a man, he said, turning back to his audience. Gentlemen, you remember my daughter Luna? She works in finance up in Boston. Works in finance, as if I were a bank teller rather than a senior executive at one of the most prestigious firms in the country. But I smiled and nodded, playing the part of the dutiful daughter. Actually, Dad, I have something special for you, I said, raising my voice slightly to ensure everyone could hear. A birthday gift that I think you're going to love. This got his attention and the attention of everyone around us. Richard Matthews loved gifts, especially expensive ones, and he loved the public recognition that came with receiving them. Oh, and what might that be? I gestured toward the driveway, where I could see the covered car sitting in the place of honor I had requested. Why don't we take a walk? And I'll show you. The crowd followed us as we made our way around the side of the house to the front drive. I had specifically requested that the car be positioned where it would be visible from the main party area, and the evening lighting made the black silk cover look dramatic and mysterious. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, addressing the crowd that had gathered around us, my father has always had impeccable taste in automobiles. So for his 65th birthday, I wanted to find something truly special. I pulled the silk cover away with a flourish, revealing the stunning Mercedes-AMG S65 Final Edition beneath. Even in the fading daylight, the matte black paint seemed to absorb and reflect light in a way that made the car look like it was crafted from liquid shadow. The silver accents gleamed, the custom wheels caught the light, and every line of the vehicle screamed luxury and power. The crowd gasped appreciatively. I heard someone say, "My God, is that a final edition?" And another voice whispered, "Do. You know how much those cost?" But I only cared about one reaction, and I turned to watch my father's face as he processed what he was saying. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something that might have been genuine surprise, maybe even appreciation. He walked around the car slowly, running his hand along the perfect paint, peering through the windows at the hand-stitched leather interior. "This is ... He started, and I held my breath, waiting for the words I had been wanting to hear my entire life. This is unnecessary. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not, "Thank you." Not, "I'm proud of you." Not even, "It's beautiful." Just unnecessary. But he wasn't done. "Honestly, Luna, what were you thinking? I already have a perfectly good S-Class. This is just ... excessive. Wasteful, really." Do you know how many charitable causes could have been funded with the money you spent on this? I felt my face flush with embarrassment and anger, but I forced myself to keep smiling. I just wanted to get you something special, Dad. Something that would what? Make people think I'm some kind of show-off? Some nouveau rich type who needs to flaunt his wealth. He shook his head, and I could see the disapproval in his eyes. This isn't who we are, Luna. The Matthews family has always believed in discretion and understated elegance. This is just ... Gaudy. A 7-100- and $50,000 masterpiece of German engineering, one of only 65 ever. Made, and he called it gaudy. The crowd was shifting uncomfortably now, sensing the tension, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they hadn't heard. I could see Sophia standing near the terrace, her hand pressed to her mouth in mock horror. James was trying not to smirk. Maybe you could return it, my father continued, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he'd used with me since childhood. Get your money back and invest it in something sensible. Lord knows you'll need every penny for retirement, given how unstable your industry is. And there it was. The casual dismissal of my career, my success, my judgment. In front of 100 of the most influential people in Massachusetts. He had just told everyone that I was financially irresponsible and professionally unstable. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of 3 decades of disappointment and rejection crushing down on me. This was it. This was the moment I had been unconsciously preparing for my entire life. The moment when I finally had to choose between my dignity and my desperate need for his approval. You're right, Dad, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside me. This was unnecessary. I reached into my purse and pulled out the car keys, holding them up so everyone could see. Then I walked over to the nearest trash can, a decorative bronze receptacle that probably cost more than most people's cars, and dropped them in with a loud clang. Completely unnecessary, I repeated, my voice getting stronger. Just like trying to impress someone who will never, ever be impressed. Just like wasting 32 years of my life trying to earn love from someone who's incapable of giving it. The silence was absolute now. Even the orchestra had stopped playing, but I wasn't done, not even close. You know what, Dad? You're absolutely right about one thing. This car is too good for you. I walked back to the Mercedes and ran my hand along its perfect surface one more time. This is a masterpiece. It represents the pinnacle of engineering, craftsmanship, and design. It's rare, it's valuable, and it's absolutely beautiful. Kind of like everything I've accomplished in my life that you've never bothered to notice. The crowd was frozen, unsure whether to stay or leave, fascinated and horrified by the family. Drama unfolding in front of them. But I didn't care about them anymore. I only cared about the man standing in front of me, the man who had shaped my entire life through his casual cruelty and systematic dismissal of everything I had ever done. Do you want to know something interesting about gifts, Dad? Really expensive. Gifts come with really expensive insurance policies. And really expensive insurance policies require really extensive documentation. Background checks, financial verification, family history verification. I reached into my purse again, this time pulling out a sealed envelope that I had been carrying for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment. I had never intended to use it. It was supposed to be my insurance policy, my nuclear option, something I would only deploy if things went catastrophically wrong. Things had just gone catastrophically wrong. See, when you're spending $750,000 on a car, the insurance company wants to make absolutely sure that you are who you say you are, that you can afford what you're buying, and that you have a legitimate reason for making such an extravagant purchase. They want to verify your identity, your family relationships, your financial history. I held up the envelope, and I could see my father's eyes narrow as he tried to figure out what I was doing. So imagine my surprise when the insurance company's background check revealed some very interesting information about our family. Information that I decided to verify independently just to be absolutely sure. I broke the seal on the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. My hands were steady now, my voice clear and strong. This is a DNA paternity test, Dad. Completely. Legitimate, court admissible, performed by one of the most reputable genetic testing companies in the country. Would you like to know what it says? The color had drained from his face, and I saw him glance quickly at my mother, who was standing near the terrace doors. She had gone completely white, her hand pressed to her throat. It says that you are not my biological father. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. I heard someone gasp, heard the clink of a champagne glass hitting the ground, heard the rustle of expensive fabric as people shifted uncomfortably. 32 years, I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word. 32 years of trying to understand why nothing I did was ever good enough for you. 32 years of wondering why James and Sophia seemed to effortlessly earn your love and approval while I had to fight for every scrap of attention. 32 years of thinking there was something fundamentally wrong with me, something that made me unworthy of being your daughter. I took a step closer to him, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in Richard Matthews' eyes. But there was never anything wrong with me, was there? You just couldn't stand looking at me because I was a constant reminder of your wife's betrayal. Every time you saw me, you saw the proof that your perfect family, your perfect life, your perfect image was all built on a lie. My mother had started crying now, quiet tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Some of the guests were beginning to back away, sensing that they were witnessing something private and devastating. The funny thing is, I said, turning to address the crowd, I actually turned out pretty well, considering. Senior Vice President at Silver Rock Capital, youngest person in the company's history to hold that position. I manage a portfolio worth over $2 billion. I've been featured in Financial Times, Forbes, and Harvard Business Review. I own a penthouse condo in Cambridge, drive a perfectly sensible BMW, and have a retirement account that most people can only dream about. I looked back at my father, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. I am successful, I am respected, and I am financially independent. I am everything you claimed a Matthews should be, except for one little detail. I'm not actually a Matthews. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of my mother's quiet sobbing and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. So here's what's going to happen, I said, walking back to the Mercedes and retrieving the keys from the trash can. I'm going to take my completely unnecessary, absolutely gorgeous, perfectly appropriate gift, and I'm going to drive it home. Because, unlike some people, I know how to appreciate quality when I see it. I opened the driver's door and slid behind the wheel, the hand-stitched leather soft against my skin. The engine started with a whisper, 8 cylinders of German precision coming to life with barely a sound. I rolled down the window and looked at the man who had raised me. The man who had never been able to love me, the man who had spent 3 decades making me feel like I wasn't enough. Oh, and Dad? I said, putting the car in gear. Happy birthday. The Mercedes handled like a dream as I navigated the winding roads away from the estate. The interior was whisper quiet, the suspension so smooth that I felt like I was floating rather than driving. Every surface was perfect, every detail carefully crafted. Every system engineered to perfection, thought it was. I realized, a lot like me, I had spent so many years focused on my flaws, on the ways I didn't measure up to Richard Matthews' impossible standards, that I had forgotten to appreciate my own worth. I was good at my job. Hell, I was exceptional at my job. I was intelligent, hardworking, and successful. I had built a life that most people would envy, and I had done it entirely on my own merit. The revelation about my paternity should have been devastating. In some ways, it meant that everything I had believed about my family, my identity, my place in the world was wrong. But as I drove through the quiet streets of Dover, heading back toward Cambridge and my real life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. All those years of trying to understand why it was different, why I never quite fit, why. My father seemed to barely tolerate my existence. It all made sense now. I wasn't defective or unworthy or fundamentally flawed. I was just the product of a different father, raised by a man who couldn't separate his anger at my mother from his treatment of me. My phone started ringing as I merged onto Route 128. I could see from the display that it was James, probably, calling to yell at me for causing a scene or embarrassing the family. I let it go to voicemail. Then Sophia called, then my mother, then James again. I turned off the phone. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't care what the Matthews family thought of my behavior. I didn't care if I had embarrassed them or damaged their reputation, or failed to live up to their expectations. They weren't my family, not really. They were just people I had lived with, people who had shaped my childhood but who had no claim on my future. As I pulled into the parking garage of my building, I realized that I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of constantly seeking approval, constantly trying to prove myself worthy of love that was never going to come, had been lifted from my shoulders. I was free. The voicemails were exactly what I had expected. James was furious, accusing me of ruining Dad's birthday party and humiliating the family in front of important people. Sophia was crying, begging me to call her back so we could work this out and fix things. My mother was incoherent, sobbing. Apologies that were 32 years too late, but the one that surprised me was the last message, from a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Blackwood, this is David Chun, senior partner at Chun, Morrison & Associates. I was at your father's party tonight, and I have to say, that was the most impressive display of professional composure under pressure I've ever witnessed. I've been following your work at Silver Rock Capital for some time, and I'd like to discuss a potential opportunity with you. Please call me at your earliest convenience. David Chun. I knew the name. Chun, Morrison & Associates was one of the most prestigious boutique investment firms in the country, specializing in high net worth clients and complex financial structures. They were small, exclusive, and incredibly selective about their partners. I listened to the message 3 times before I believed it was real. The next morning, I called him back. 3 days later, I was sitting in his office in downtown Boston, discussing a partnership offer that would double my salary and give me equity in one of the most respected firms in the industry. I'll be honest, David said, leaning back in his leather chair. We've been trying to figure out how to approach you for months. Your reputation in the industry is exceptional, and your client retention rate is unmatched. But we weren't sure you'd be interested in leaving Silver Rock. What changed your mind? I asked. He smiled. Saturday night. The way you handled that situation showed me everything I needed to know about your character. You stood up for yourself with grace and dignity, even when it cost you personally. That's exactly the kind of person we want as a partner. I accepted the offer. The transition to Chun, Morrison & Associates was seamless. My clients followed me without hesitation, several of them commenting that they had always wondered why I was working for someone else instead of being in charge. My new partners treated me as an equal from day one, seeking my input on major decisions and respecting my expertise. For the first time in my career, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. I had moved to a larger office with an even better view of the city. The Mercedes was parked in my reserved space in the executive garage. My business cards now read Luna Blackwood, senior partner, instead of senior vice president. And the difference in how people treated me was remarkable, but the most significant change was internal. I no longer woke up every morning with the annoying need to prove myself. I no longer checked my phone compulsively, hoping for some sign of approval from people who were incapable of giving it. I no longer spent my evenings working late just to distract myself from the loneliness that came from never feeling good enough. I was good enough. I had always been good enough. I just hadn't been looking for validation in the right places. The Matthews family had made several attempts to contact me over the months. James had shown up at my office once, demanding that I stop being childish and think about the family's reputation. I had my assistant inform him that I was in meetings for the rest of the day, and every day thereafter when he called, Sophia had tried a different approach, sending flowers and handwritten notes begging me to come to family dinners and holiday celebrations. I sent the flowers to the hospital and threw away the notes unread. My mother had made the most persistent efforts, calling weekly and leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. I had listened to the first few, hoping to hear some acknowledgement of the pain she had caused, some genuine apology for the years of allowing her husband to treat me like an unwanted burden. Instead, I heard only self-pity and manipulation. Pleas for me to forgive and forget, and think about what this is doing to the family. Finally, I changed my phone number. The man I'd called father for 32 years never tried to contact me at all. The call came on a Tuesday morning in April, almost exactly a year after the birthday party. I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant buzzed in to tell me there was a lawyer on the line who insisted it was urgent. Miss Blackwood? This is Harold Westbrook from Westbrook, Patterson and Associates. I represent the estate of Richard Matthews. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Richard Matthews was dead? Heart attack 3 days ago while playing golf at his country club. The funeral had been yesterday. I felt nothing. No grief, no relief, no closure. Just the mild interest one might feel when hearing about the death of a distant acquaintance. I'm calling because you're named in his will, Westbrook continued. Could you come in this week to discuss the specifics? I almost laughed. Even in death, Richard Matthews was finding ways to manipulate and control. Whatever he had left me, if he had left me anything at all, it would come with strings attached, conditions designed to force me back into the family fold. I'm not interested, I said. Whatever it is, I don't want it. Miss Blackwood, I really think you should hear the details before making that decision. Mr. Matthews was very specific about his intentions regarding your inheritance. Something in his tone made me reconsider. Fine, but I can give you 30 minutes, and that's it. Westbrook's office was exactly what I expected. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, the smell of old money, and older secrets. He was a small, neat man in his 60s, with the kind of precise diction that came from decades of reading legal documents aloud. Before we begin, he said, settling behind his massive desk, I want you to know that Mr. Matthews came to me about 6 months ago to make significant changes to his will. He was very clear about his reasons, and very specific about his instructions. He opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. The bulk of his estate, the house, the business, the investment accounts, goes to James and Sophia, as expected. But there are some unusual provisions. I waited, wondering what final insult Richard Matthews had devised for me. To Luna Blackwood, Westbrook read, who showed me what real strength looks like. I leave the following. First, my collection of vintage automobiles, currently housed in the garage at the Dover estate. Second, the sum of $5 million, to be transferred immediately upon my death with no conditions or restrictions. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. I'm sorry, what? $5 million, Miss Blackwood, plus the car collection, which is worth approximately another $2 million. There has to be a mistake. Westbrook shook his head and handed me a sealed envelope. He also left this for you. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The handwriting was unmistakably his. The same careful script I remembered from birthday cards and report card signatures from my childhood. Luna, if you're reading this, then I'm dead. And you're probably wondering why a man who spent 32 years treating you badly would leave. You a fortune. The truth is, I always knew you weren't my biological daughter. I knew it from the moment you were born and didn't look like me or James. I could have asked for a paternity test then. Could have confronted your mother. Could have handled the situation like a mature adult. Instead, I took my anger and disappointment out on a child who had done nothing wrong. I spent 3 decades punishing you for your mother's mistakes, treating you like a burden instead of recognizing you for the remarkable person you were becoming. That night at my birthday party, when you stood up to me in front of everyone, when you refused to accept my treatment any longer, I finally saw you clearly. You weren't the weak, desperate girl I had convinced myself you were. You were strong, successful, and absolutely right to walk away from people who didn't appreciate your worth. I spent the last year of my life watching you from a distance, reading about your success, hearing from mutual acquaintances about your new position and your accomplishments. I was proud of you, Luna, and ashamed of myself for never telling you so. I can't undo 32 years of damage. I can't give you back the childhood you deserved or the father you needed. But I can acknowledge that you succeeded not because of my influence, but in spite of it. You are everything I raised James to be, and you did it entirely on your own. The money is not an apology. No amount of money could be sufficient for that. It's recognition. Recognition of your strength, your intelligence, and your remarkable ability to thrive even when the people who should have supported you failed you completely. Use it well. You've earned it. Richard Matthews. I read the letter 3 times before I looked up at Westbrook, who was watching you with the patient expression of someone who had seen every possible reaction to unexpected inheritances. The transfer can be completed within 48 hours, he said quietly, and the cars can be moved whenever you're ready. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. $7 million. More money than I had ever imagined having. Enough to be completely financially independent for the rest of my life. But more than that, it was something I had never expected to receive. Acknowledgement, recognition, an admission that I had been right all along. There's one more thing, Westbrook said, pulling out another document. He also left instructions for his obituary. He wanted to make sure it mentioned all of his children's accomplishments accurately. He handed me a copy of the newspaper clipping. There, in black and white, was a detailed description of my career achievements, my position at Chun, Morrison and Associates, and my recognition as one of Boston's most successful young executives. For the first time since receiving the phone call, I felt emotion welling up in my chest. Not grief, exactly, but something complicated and bittersweet. It was too little, too late, but it was something. I used part of the inheritance to buy a house. Not a mansion like the Matthews estate, but a beautiful colonial in Lexington with a 3-car garage and enough space for the vintage automobile collection I had unexpectedly acquired. The cars were gorgeous. A 1967 Shelby Cobra, a 1970 Plymouth Cuda, a 1963 Corvette split window, a 1969 Dodge Charger RT, and several others. Each one was a masterpiece, meticulously maintained and perfectly restored. I kept the Mercedes-AMG S65 Final Edition, of course. It had become more than just a car to me. It was a symbol of my transformation, a reminder of the night I finally chose myself over the approval of others. The rest of the inheritance I invested wisely, working with my partners at Chun, Morrison and Associates to create a diversified portfolio. That would ensure my financial security for life. But I also set aside a significant portion for something else. A foundation. The Blackwood Foundation for Educational Excellence was established 6 months after Richard Matthews died. Its mission was simple: to provide scholarships and mentorship to young women from difficult family situations who showed exceptional academic promise. I wanted to help girls who were struggling with the same feelings of inadequacy and rejection that had defined my own childhood. The foundation's first recipient was a brilliant 17-year-old named Maya Rodriguez, whose alcoholic father had spent years telling her she was worthless and would never amount to anything. She reminded me of myself at that age, fierce, determined, but carrying the weight of parental disapproval like a physical burden. "I don't understand why you're helping me," she said during our first meeting. "You don't even know me." "I know." "Enough," I replied. "I know what it's like to believe that you're not good enough, to spend every day trying to prove your worth to people who are incapable of seeing it. And I know what you're capable of achieving when you finally realize that their opinion doesn't define your value." Maya went on to attend MIT on a full scholarship. She was the first of many. 2 years after the inheritance, I was working late in my home office when the doorbell rang. It was past 9 o'clock on a Thursday night, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the security monitor, I could see a woman standing on my front porch, shifting nervously from foot to foot. It was Sophia. She looked different than I remembered. Older, thinner, with worry lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she was wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her typical designer ensemble. I considered not answering the door. I had built a good life for myself, free from the toxicity and manipulation that had defined my relationship with the Matthews family. I didn't owe her anything, didn't need to subject myself to whatever emotional manipulation she had planned, but curiosity won out. I opened the door but didn't invite her.
Hello, Sophia.
Luna, her voice was barely above a whisper. Thank you for seeing me. I wasn't sure you would. I haven't decided if I am seeing you yet. What do you want? She took a shaky breath. I want to apologize for everything. For all the years of treating you like you didn't matter, for not standing up to Dad when he was cruel to you, for being part of the problem instead of part of the solution. I studied her face, looking for signs of the practiced insincerity that had always characterized our interactions. Instead, I saw genuine anguish, real remorse. And what brought on this sudden attack of conscience? My daughter, she said simply.
Emma, she's 14 now and she's struggling.
Her grades are slipping, she's acting out. She won't talk to me or David about what's wrong. Last week, I found her crying in her room, and when I asked her what was wrong, she said she felt like nothing she did was ever good enough for us. Sophia's voice broke, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. It was like hearing an echo from the past. Like hearing you, all those years ago, trying to understand why Dad never seemed proud of you no matter what you accomplished. And I realized that I had learned all the wrong lessons from watching our family dynamic. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I've been putting the same kind of pressure on Emma that Dad put on you. Different in the details, but the same in the effect. I've been so focused on molding her into what I thought she should be that I forgot to appreciate who she actually is. I felt something shift inside me, a small crack in the wall I had built around my heart when it came to my former family. What do you want from me, Sophia? I want to know how to fix it, she said. How to undo years of damage. How to show my daughter that she's enough just as she is. You figured out how to overcome what Dad did to you. You built this amazing life, became this incredibly successful person. How did you do it? For a moment, I considered giving her a cold, dismissive answer and closing the door. It would have been satisfying, a small revenge for all the years of being dismissed and overlooked. But looking at her face, seeing the genuine desperation and love for her daughter, I couldn't do it. Come in, I said, stepping aside. We sat in my living room, surrounded by the beautiful things I had bought with money I had earned through my own hard work and talent. Sophia looked around with obvious surprise. I think she'd expected my home to be cold and austere, reflecting the bitter person she assumed I had become. It's beautiful, she said. It feels warm, happy. That was the goal. We talked for 3 hours. I told her about the years of therapy I had undergone to undo the damage of constantly seeking approval from people who would never give it. I explained how I had learned to separate my self-worth from other people's opinions, how I built a life based on my own values rather than trying to meet impossible expectations. The hardest part, I said, was accepting that Dad's inability to love me wasn't actually about me. It was about his own issues, his own anger and disappointment. Once I understood that, I could stop trying to fix something that was never my responsibility to fix. Sophia nodded, absorbing every word. How do I show Emma that I love her unconditionally? How do I convince her that she doesn't have to be perfect to be worthy of love? You start by examining your own behavior, I said. You look at the messages you're sending, consciously and unconsciously, about what she needs to do to earn your approval. And then you change them. I paused, thinking about the teenage girl I had been, desperately seeking validation from adults who were too damaged to give it. And you tell her the truth. You apologize for putting pressure on her. You acknowledge that you made mistakes. And you commit to doing better. Kids are remarkably forgiving when they see genuine effort to change. When Sophia left that night, she hugged me for the first time since we were children. It wasn't a reconciliation exactly. Too much had happened for us to simply go back to being sisters. But it was something. A beginning, maybe 6 months later, she sent me a photo of Emma at her school's science fair, grinning proudly next to a project about renewable energy. The caption read, "She didn't win first place, but She's proud of her work, and that's what matters. Thank you for helping me remember what's important. The call came on a Tuesday morning in September, 3 years after the inheritance. I was reviewing acquisition proposals when my assistant buzzed in to tell me that the CEO of Silver Rock Capital wanted to speak with me, Marcus. Wellington had been my boss during my final years at Silver Rock, a sharp, ambitious man in his 50s, who had always treated me with professional respect, but had never seemed particularly interested in my opinions or insights. I couldn't imagine why he would be calling me now. Luna? His voice boomed through the phone with artificial enthusiasm. How are you? How's life at Chun Morrison treating you? Very well, Marcus. What can I do for you?
Well, I'll cut to the chase.
We're looking to expand our senior partnership, and your name came up in our discussions. We'd like you to consider coming back to Silver Rock as a senior managing partner. Full equity stake, your own team, complete autonomy over your portfolio. I almost laughed out loud. Silver Rock Capital, the company that had been perfectly happy to let me leave 3 years ago, suddenly wanted me back now that I had proven my worth elsewhere. That's flattering, Marcus, but I'm very happy where I am. I haven't mentioned the compensation package yet, he said, and I could hear the confidence in his voice. He was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted through the simple application of money. We're talking about a significant increase over what you're making now. Significant. I'm not interested in the numbers, Marcus. I'm interested in respect and being valued for my contributions and working with partners who see me as an equal. Those aren't things you can buy. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Luna, I think there may have been some misunderstandings during your time here. Perhaps we didn't communicate clearly enough how much we valued your work. There was no misunderstanding, I said calmly. You valued my work well enough to benefit from it, but you never valued me as a person or as a professional. There's a difference. Look, I know you might have some lingering resentments about how things ended, but this is business. This is about building the best possible team for our clients. Lingering resentments. As if my decision to leave had been based on petty grievances rather than a fundamental recognition that I deserved better. Marcus, can I ask you something? When I left Silver Rock, did you make any effort to retain me? Did you offer me a promotion? A raise, additional responsibilities? Did you even ask why I was leaving? Another pause. Well, we assumed you had made your decision, ... You assumed that I wasn't worth fighting for. You assumed that my departure wouldn't significantly impact the company. And you know what? You were wrong on both counts. I took 12 major clients, with me representing over $1 billion in managed assets. Our mutual friends in the industry tell me that Silver Rock's reputation has taken a hit since I left. I could hear him shifting uncomfortably in his chair, which is exactly why we want you back. We recognize your value now. You recognize my value now that I'm no longer available. Now that I've proven myself somewhere else, now that I have options. And leverage? But 3 years ago, when I was sitting in your office managing your oddest accounts and generating millions in revenue, my value was somehow invisible to you. The line was quiet except for the sound of his breathing. I appreciate the offer, Marcus, but I'm not interested in working for people who only recognize my worth after I've walked away. I'm not interested in being valued for what I can do for you rather than for who I am. Luna, be reasonable. This is a tremendous opportunity. For you, I interrupted. This is a tremendous opportunity for you. For me, it would be a step backward, into a situation where I would constantly have to prove myself worthy of respect that should be freely given. I looked out the window of my office at the city where I'd built a new life based on my own terms and my own values. I've learned something important over the past few years, Marcus. I've learned that the most powerful position you can be in is not needing something that someone else wants to give you. I don't need Silver Rock's validation or recognition. I don't need the prestige of your company name or the security of your compensation package. I have built something better. What's better than one of the most prestigious firms in the country? A firm where I'm valued from day one. Partners who respect my judgment and seek my input on major decisions. Clients who appreciate my expertise and trust my recommendations. A workplace where I don't have to constantly prove that I belong. I paused, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. You know what the real tragedy is, Marcus? If you had shown me half this level of interest and respect when I was actually working for you, I never would have left. You could have had my loyalty, my dedication, my best years. Instead, you get a polite refusal and the knowledge that you let one of your best assets walk away because you couldn't see her value when she was standing right in front of you. Luna, I think you're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was staying at Silver Rock as long as I did. But I've learned from that mistake and I won't be repeating it. If you change your mind, I won't, I said, and hung up the phone. My assistant buzzed in a few minutes later. Miss Blackwood? Mr. Chen would like to see you when you have a moment. I found David in his office, grinning like he had just won the lottery. I take it you heard about Silver Rock's offer, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Marcus Wellington called me directly after he talked to you. Wanted to know if there was any truth to the rumor that we were promoting you to managing partner and giving you a larger equity stake. I raised an eyebrow. Is there any truth to that rumor? There is now, he said, pulling out a folder thick with legal documents. We've been discussing it for months, but Wellington's call convinced us to accelerate our timeline. We don't want to lose you to someone who's finally figured out what they had. The promotion came with a significant salary increase, a larger share of the firm's profits, and my name added to the company letterhead. But more than that, it came with something I had never experienced in my previous job, the unquestioned assumption that I belonged exactly where I was. That evening, I drove home in the Mercedes, thinking about the phone call from Marcus Wellington and the career path that had brought me to this point. 3 years ago, I had walked away from Silver Rock because I finally understood that I deserved better than their grudging acknowledgement of my contributions. Now they wanted me back, not because they had suddenly developed the ability to appreciate their employees, but because my absence had forced them to confront the cost of their blindness. It felt like poetic justice, the kind of subtle revenge that didn't require grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply refusing to accept less than your worth. The invitation arrived in expensive cardstock, embossed with gold lettering and tied with a silk ribbon. James Matthews was getting married to some socialite from New York, and apparently I was still considered family enough to receive an invitation. I stared at the elegant script, trying to decide how I felt about this development. It had been 4 years since the birthday party debacle, 3 years since Richard Matthews died, and about 2 years since my last conversation with any member of my former family. Excluding the evening with Sophia, the wedding was scheduled for October at the family's estate in Dover. Black tie affair, naturally, with a guest list that would undoubtedly include every important name in Massachusetts society. The kind of event where appearances mattered more than genuine emotion, where the bride and groom would be secondary to the networking opportunities. I was about to throw the invitation away when I noticed something tucked behind the main card. A handwritten note. Luna, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I had to try. I've been thinking a lot about our family over the past few years, especially since Dad died. I've been thinking about how we treated you, how I treated you, and I'm not proud of what I see when I look back. I was jealous of you. I know that sounds ridiculous, given that I was supposedly the golden child, but it's true. You were smarter than me, more driven, more independent. You didn't need Dad's approval the way I did, and that made you stronger than I ever was. When you walked away that night at Dad's birthday party, part of me wished I had the courage to walk away too. You stood up to him in a way I never could, never did. You chose your dignity over his approval, and I respected you for it even as I resented you for making me look weak by comparison. I don't expect you to come to the wedding. I don't expect you to forgive me or welcome me back into your life. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand what Dad never did. You were always the best of us, And we were too threatened by that to admit it if you ever decide you want. To talk, I'll be here. James, I read the note 3 times, looking for the manipulation or hidden agenda that I had learned to expect from my former family. Instead, I found something I hadn't seen from James in decades. Honesty didn't erase 30 years of casual cruelty and competitive jealousy. It didn't undo the damage that had been done or restore the relationship we might have had if he had been capable of seeing me as a sister rather than a threat. But it was acknowledgement, and that mattered. I or SVPD that I would not be attending the wedding. But I sent a gift, a beautiful crystal vase from Tiffany with a card that simply said, "Wishing you happiness." Luna, 3 days after the wedding, I received a thank you note that was brief but genuine. Thank you for the beautiful gift and for the grace you've shown our family, even when we didn't deserve it. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was closure. A recognition that we had all been shaped by the dysfunction of our family system, and that some of us had managed to grow beyond it while others were still struggling to understand their part in. If 5 years after the birthday party that changed everything, I found myself back in Dover, Massachusetts. Not at the Matthews estate, but at the town library, where I was speaking to a group of high school students about career opportunities. In finance, the library was a beautiful old building with high ceilings and tall windows that let in streams of golden afternoon light. The students were a diverse group, some clearly from wealthy families, others obviously working class, all of them at the age where they were trying to figure out who they wanted to become. "The most important thing I can tell you," I said, wrapping up my presentation, "is that your worth is not determined by other people's opinions of you. Success is not just about money or prestige or meeting other people's expectations. Success is about building a life that reflects your values, your talents, and your definition of fulfillment." A girl in the front row raised her hand. She was maybe 17, with intelligent eyes and the kind of focused intensity I recognized from my own teenage years. But what if the people whose opinions matter most to you, like your parents, don't support your goals? What if they think you're making the wrong choices? I smiled, remembering the girl I had been at her age, desperate for parental approval and terrified of disappointing the adults, who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Then you have to decide what matters more, their approval or your authentic self. And I can tell you from experience that choosing authenticity, even when it costs you relationships, is always the right choice in the long run. After the presentation, several students approached me with questions. The girl who had asked about parental approval lingered until the others had left. "I'm sorry if this is too personal," she said, "but you sounded like you were speaking from experience. Did you have to choose between your family and your goals?" I studied her face, seeing the worry and uncertainty that I remembered so well from my own adolescence. "I did," I said simply. "And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But it was also one of the best decisions I've ever made." "Do you ever regret it?" I thought about the question seriously, considering all the ways my life might have been different if I had continued seeking the approval of people who were incapable of giving it. "No," I said finally. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the adults in my life weren't able to love me for who I was, rather than trying to mold me into who they thought I should be. But I don't regret choosing myself. I don't regret refusing to accept less than I deserved." She nodded, and I could see her processing the information, trying to apply it to her own situation. "Can I give you some advice?" I asked. "Please, don't. Wait until you're 32 to start believing in your own worth. Don't spend the next 15 years trying to earn love from people who have already shown you that their approval comes with impossible conditions. You are enough exactly as you are right now. Anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve access to your life." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how different my life had become since that night 5 years ago when I finally chose myself over the approval of others. I had built a career that fulfilled me, surrounded myself with people who valued and respected me, and created a life that reflected my own priorities rather than someone else's expectations. The Mercedes purred, quietly as I navigated the familiar. roads past the exit that would have taken me to the Matthews estate. I didn't feel the old urge to drive by the house, to check if the lights were on or wonder what my former family was doing. That part of my life was truly behind me now, not because I had forgiven or forgotten, but because I had finally completely moved on. 6 months later, I was cleaning out my home office when I found Richard Matthews' letter, the one he had left with his will. I had read it several times in the weeks after his death, but then I had filed it away and tried not to think about it. Now, reading it again with the perspective of time and emotional distance, I could see it more clearly. It wasn't really an apology. Apologies require acknowledgement of specific harms and genuine remorse. It was an explanation, maybe even a justification, from a man who had finally recognized the cost of his cruelty, but was still trying to maintain some moral high ground, but it was also something else, a recognition that I had succeeded not because of his influence, but in spite of it. Admission that the strength he had tried to break had actually been forged by his attempts to diminish me. Folded the letter carefully and put it back in my desk drawer. Not because I treasured it or found comfort in it, but because it served as a reminder of how far I had come. It was evidence of a transformation that had begun with a DNA test and a birthday party confrontation, but had ultimately been about much more than family secrets or public humiliation. It had been about learning to value myself when others wouldn't, about choosing dignity over approval, about building a life based on my own definition of success, rather than trying to meet impossible expectations set by people who were too damaged to recognize my worth. Girl who had stood in that driveway 5 years ago, desperate for her father's approval, was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own value, who had built a life that reflected her priorities and values, who had learned that the most powerful revenge is living well on your own terms. Sometimes, the best way to win is simply to stop playing a game that was rigged against you from the beginning. Sometimes, the most profound victory is walking away. Have you ever had to choose between peace and family? Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is walking away. If my story resonated with you, hit like, subscribe to Silent Revenge, and share your story in the comments. Remember, justice doesn't have to be loud to be unforgettable.